Prior to 1986, Vietnam was one of the poorest nations in the world. Just a little more than a decade prior to that, the country had come off of a very dark and devastating period of history. That all changed, however, when the government launched the Doi Moi economic and political reforms. This effectively created a socialist-orientated market economy. According to the World Bank, between 2002 and 2018, more than 45 million people were lifted out of poverty. Today, Vietnam is an evolving environment. The population is expected to grow significantly over the next 30 years, and with 70% of the population currently under 35 years of age, for the foreseeable future, they will have a very young and relatively well-educated base. While it is important to remember that Vietnam is still a socialist country, the state is becoming economically proactive, signing the CPTPP, that's the Trans-Pacific Partnership, in January of 2019. At the forefront of Canadian enterprise in Vietnam and supporting both Vietnamese and Canadian companies to succeed in each other's respective markets is the Canadian Chamber of Commerce in Vietnam, or CanCham Vietnam. Today, on the Global Canadian Business Forum, we're going to talk with CanCham Vietnam and ask about doing business in one of the most dynamic and exciting markets in the world. My guests today are President of the Chamber, Bao Ngyuen, and Leonhard, Director of Business Development. Gentlemen, both of you have a tremendous amount of experience, and we thank you for joining us on the Global Canadian Business Forum.
Thank you very much for having us. I'm happy to be here.
Just before we get into talking about the Chamber itself, I'm wondering if you could maybe introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about your backgrounds.
Well, I am a Canadian-born citizen of Vietnamese descent. My dad's from Hanoi. My mom's from Ho Chi Minh, Saigon. They left Vietnam in the 50s. My dad was educated in France, my mom in Switzerland. And they met, wed, and I was conceived and born in Canada. I'm from Montreal. I lived all of my life before moving to Vietnam in 2008. My background is more financial. I used to work in investment banking with CIBC World Markets out of the Montreal office.
And I've been with the Chamber for almost 4 years now. I moved here in mid-2016 with my wife, mostly to pursue international business opportunities. My background is a little bit more eclectic than many people here. I have 2 degrees in English literature, but I came up working in small business to pay my way through all of that. And most of my family have their own businesses. So making the move from small business to looking at a larger scale, more macro, was a very natural step. And I've been very happy here since working with the Chamber.
Can you go through a little bit of the history of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce?
Sure. 2020 will be the 20th anniversary of the Chamber. So we became an official business association in 2000, in March 2000. And like most chambers, we began more as a networking and social organization for Canadian business people here in Vietnam. And in terms of history, the Chamber has changed very much. We've gone through a few different evolutions over those 20 years. 2 of the more notable are, I believe it's 8 years ago, the Canadian Chamber of Commerce Board decided that rather than operating as what many would consider to be a charity-style NPO, where we would give all of our profits to a charity or for CSR work, we decided that we wanted to move more like a corporate. And in doing so, we've put that revenue back into capacity building. And since then, we've grown pretty dramatically year on year. And that has allowed us to offer more services and more supports to our members, but also to contribute more in terms of CSR and charity. And then the next big evolution in recent history was about 3 years ago, where, excuse me, where the Chamber decided to be more proactive when it came to building bilateral ties between Canada and Vietnam. And since then, we've been doing business development both on the Vietnamese side and on the Canadian side. And we're really starting to see the results of that. And also, we're looking forward to seeing more as Canadian companies look to leverage the CPTPP opportunities more in the future. So we have a very bright outlook going forward.
I mentioned a little bit in the intro that things are changing very quickly right now in Vietnam. Can you tell us a little bit about sort of your membership base at the Chamber and what sort of industries are represented and how that might be evolving over the last few years?
Yes, and I think that's a really interesting question because it speaks a lot to the transition that Vietnam is going through. Currently, we have about 110 members, and that has varied a little bit over the last few years, but within that number, we've seen pretty dramatic change. So for a very long time, we had a lot of longtime members that wanted to support the Chamber, and while they were part of our membership, they also weren't very active. So as the market has changed, as it's become more competitive, a lot of these businesses are starting to get edged out of market share, and they're having to tighten their budgets. And the people that originally decided to be members of the Chamber are starting to retire. So we're seeing a lot of turnover in that side, but we're seeing more than that come back in these new businesses that are coming into the market. And they're joining for the value that's added by the Chamber. They need the supports that we can offer, and they're also being more engaged because they see the value in maintaining that relationship, especially because of what we're doing in terms of bilateral development. And for our side, that makes us a lot more comfortable because they're more likely to stay as members over a longer term, and they're also more likely to see the value over a short and long term. So that's been a really interesting transition that we've been watching happen over the last few years. And we're looking forward to seeing more of that latter category, the new members, in the next few years.
So it's exciting to see what's going to happen over the next few years. Then things will change, I'm sure, again in such a dynamic market as Vietnam.
Certainly, yeah. I mean, Vietnam has, I believe, truly all of the stars aligned. I think it's a once in a generation thing. To put things into context for fellow Canadians who haven't had the privilege or the pleasure of traveling to this part of the world, imagine that, well, statistically, Vietnam is, as you said in your intro, close to 100 million in population, right? It's around 2.6 times more populous than Canada. In terms of surface, it's around 26 times smaller than Canada. So in terms of density, imagine that, say, if you apply a factor of close to 80 to it, imagine that now you're living in a city, right, of 480 million all of a sudden, right? That's how dynamic you have to see it. And Vietnam is at the stage of development where everything needs to be built, right? Imagine that you're back in Canada around 50 years ago. All the infrastructure is being built. All the universities are being built. Rising income, rising disposable income, rising education, more connectivity towards the world, openness, business, everything is coming to Vietnam. And obviously, as a chamber, we would definitely love to have more Canadian companies come and see, come and visit, come and explore.
It sounds to me that there are opportunities in virtually every sector that one can think of then.
Certainly.
Absolutely.
So what about some of the challenges do you think maybe a Canadian company might have in starting up in Vietnam or taking a product to Vietnam?
I think that the challenge they would meet would be, the broad lines would be the same if they were to enter any different market. What people have to understand is that truly cultural differences are a real thing, right? If you want to come and do business in Vietnam, come often. Have some patience. Come and talk to people who are here on the ground. Canada does have a support network here in Vietnam, either through the Chamber of Commerce or the Consular Services or the embassy. Right? Uh, do not expect that you're just crossing the southern border and entering the States. It's not by doing 3 visits you're going to hand out, people are going to hand you a contract. Understand that Vietnam is a country of survivors, right? Staying power is something that people value here. Relationships are built slightly differently, but it doesn't mean that, and the potential is certainly there. But you have to come and understand, you have to be patient. Things take time, but the future of the world is in Asia, and certainly Vietnam has a big part to play in that.
We've done a number of these interviews around the world, and this theme is common throughout. If you want to do business in anywhere, in any region of the world, you need to put boots to the ground. You need to spend some time developing those relationships.
And I think for Canada's well positioned because the Canadian brand in Vietnam is very strong. And Vietnam as a country, as purchaser of services, or technology, are very early adopters, right? They welcome international expertise. Canada being a G7 country certainly can play a bigger role here in Vietnam.
So just to give a little bit of a hypothetical example, if an individual or a company has a product that they think might succeed in Vietnam, would you recommend as their first step to reach out to the Canadian Chamber?
Yes, absolutely. And that's not necessarily to become a member, but to understand a little bit more about the market, understand a little bit more about what we do. So because we are something of a smaller chamber compared to, say, Shanghai or something like that, we offer much more tailored services and support to our members. So a very important part of any new membership and also of any member renewal is having a discussion about what that company's objectives are, what their product and services are, how they're evolving as they spend time here, to better understand how the chamber can support them. And if there, for some reason, isn't that opportunity to really, truly support them, you'll have a very candid conversation about why that is, and also talk about where they might find the supports that they're looking for. So generally speaking, when we're looking at new members, the ideal is someone who brings a win-win-win scenario. So that's a win for the chamber. They add value to the chamber. They add value to the greater membership as a whole. And then they derive value from both the chamber and the greater membership as a whole. So we're looking to create a very synergistic, very comprehensive membership base. And that's been the approach over the last 3 years. And it's really reaping dividends for many of our members. And we're seeing a lot more long-term planning with our members year on year. So it's working well. And so when you're talking about this hypothetical Canadian company that's looking at doing something here, having that conversation can be very enlightening and hopefully very valuable to that prospective business.
I mean, like, if I might chime in here, around the board, there's more than, certainly more than 100 years of experience here in Vietnam, right? We can bridge the cultural gap because we all grew up in Canada, right? And we are here in Vietnam, and our expertise is across various industries. We're here to help, and so we can certainly condense in actionable terms very quickly what people need to know. By engaging with us, within a few meetings, they would have, perhaps if they did it by themselves, within 2 years, maybe they wouldn't learn those lessons yet. And we're here to distill that message.
Well, fantastic. I'm certainly glad to see both of you running the ship there. It sounds like you're doing a fantastic job.
I serve as president. Ryan is our, business development director, but we are part of the team, right? We have 6 full-time dedicated staff. We have up to 9 board members, and we have a very involved membership that can be called upon as required.
Now, we touched a little bit on this earlier, but can you give us your top 3 tips to Canadians or Canadian companies that want to do business in Vietnam?
Well, I would say, first of all, come and do business in Vietnam. Come often. Talk to people who are on the ground. Be respectful of Vietnamese culture. Recognize that maybe you've done this business for 40 years in Canada or North America. Does not necessarily translate one-to-one that you can be able to do business here. Well, I mean, in the same way, that's what I mean. Certainly you can do business here, but not necessarily the same way. Relationships are not built exactly the same way.
So to pare that down into 3 points, come here and come often. Understand that you're working in a very different culture and you have to work on building that relationship here. And 3, you should probably come and talk to us.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ryan.
No
Fantastic.
problem.
So going forward, what are the goals of the Canadian Chamber?
Well, for next year, our path, well, the big items that we have on our agenda is traditionally the Canadian Chamber of Commerce in Vietnam hosts the first big business luncheon of the year where we get forecasts for the upcoming year. That's an event that we call the Crystal Ball. And that will pave the way for a business survey, which will allow us to communicate more directly towards more Vietnamese-based entities. We will also reach out more to Canadian-based entities also, with the objective of starting to organize business delegations of Vietnamese companies to Canada and taking Canadian businesses also to Vietnam, leading to a regional conference, as Vietnam in 2020 will be the chair of the ASEAN, Association of Southeast Asian Nations. And when we bring in the Canadian companies to Vietnam, I figure since most Canadian companies are starting to explore, if they're going to go all the way to Vietnam, might as well meet up all the other regional chambers also.
Yeah, if we're looking beyond next year, we're looking at a lot more of the same, just bigger. So we've been building bilateral business communities through the chamber for the last 3 years. And as I mentioned earlier, we're starting to see a lot more return on that. We're starting to see more engagement on both sides. And we would like to really grow that because there is really opportunities for delegations going in either direction, more opportunity to just have communication between the 2 sides, and to just build closer links. So that's the core of our future strategy. It's developing what we do, but it's also about continuing to evolve with the needs of those members on both sides. So what we offer now may be something that can't be offered in 5 years because we're offering something much more comprehensive or much more valuable. So we're looking to keep up with our members and continue to be shaped by their needs. So we're just looking to continue evolving.
And as a marketing spin or marketing spiel, I may add up on that. A lesser known fact is Canada is already the largest trading partner with, Vietnam is the largest trading partner with Canada within the ASEAN countries. Right? So, as we said earlier, the Canada brand is strong in Vietnam. Plus, with CPTPP, Canadian companies, can access a block of 500 million people, which represents 14% of global GDP. And since Canada is already well represented, or at least has some on-the-ground support here, we certainly invite more Canadian companies to come and take a look here.
Amazing. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us.
Happy to do so.
Pleasure.
Happy to talk about the opportunities in Vietnam for Canadian businesses.
Thank you. And for all those watching, thank you very much for watching. If you've liked the video, please hit like. And if you want to get more information, we encourage you to reach out directly to the Canadian Chamber of Commerce in Vietnam. They would love to give you some hand. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alan.